Hi, everyone. Good evening. Carl Steinbeck here. Didn't think I'd be covering the Bryan Kolberger case this soon, but as you also found out today, the surprising, shocking news that Bryan Kolberger has actually cut a deal with the state of Idaho, the prosecutors there in Moscow, that offered him life, and he's not going to be facing the death penalty if he accepts his plea, if the judge accepts the plea as well in the open court that they'll be having sometime in the near future. So I think it's a something to talk about the pros and cons, and it's something I think is overall a win for justice. And so I'll walk you all through that and show you why I think that is. So here's something that was on CNN. And he is avoiding death penalty, so he's able to save his life this way. And he is 30 years old, it says. He fatally stabbed 4 University of Idaho students in the apartment in 2022. And he agreed to a plea deal in this quadruple murder. They were all in one house there where numerous college students were staying at. And this thing has been going on for several years already. So the fact that they're not going to have to have a 3-month trial, I think, is a huge relief, emotional relief for a lot of people involved, including the victim's family. And this was slated to go to trial in August 18th. And here it says the prosecutors were pursuing the death penalty. So the thing is, if you do have the death penalty, that's a good thing to help force plea agreements from those charged with murder. Because if you didn't have the death penalty, this guy would be going to trial. There would be no incentive to try to cut a deal. And so this is good for states that have the death penalty, have this as a leverage to use for those that commit heinous crimes like murder. And it says here the deal was announced with a letter sent to the victims' families, according to the Idaho statements. And the Gonsalves family, who described the announcement as very unexpected, said they were furious at the state of Idaho in a post on Facebook. So I think that, they thought he deserved the death penalty. A lot of people can say that, and he does deserve it if he's found guilty. But, the thing is, the family is probably not realizing at this point, it's all emotional reaction, how much heartache and grief would be going through this 3-month trial. And it's not a slam dunk win, even though he could be, let's say he's it's a case where there's no doubt he's going to be found guilty. There's so many things that can go wrong in a 3-month trial. And so this is going to avoid all that. Think about it. You don't have a prosecutor that's trying murder cases day in, day out, year after year. It's a little small town in Idaho, a little small college town. So they don't have the experience there. Not even if they had folks from the Idaho Attorney General's office there, they're not going to be experienced handling murder cases. Also, the public defenders representing him, they don't have a lot of experience, I'm sure, dealing with murder cases either. So you had all this pressure. Also, the judge is not used to having murder cases there in Idaho. So you had all this pressure on all 3 of these parties. And then you have the world media coverage on it. And so it's very much something that can have a lot of downsides to it. Okay. So is he going to get killed by lethal means by the state? No. But, prison can be very much a dangerous place. It's just in and of itself. So maybe he could be taken out by another inmate because he is world famous for being a vicious killer. So the thing is that a lot of the stuff that the defense tried to bring forward as evidence, even including other culprits they wanted to bring forward, the judge denied that. And they did get the motion granted, though, to have the venue change from Moscow to Boise, the state capital. That's the most populated city in Idaho. So I think if you think about the logistics costs for the community there, having to pay for the prosecution to live in Boise, and all the prosecution members, as well as the public defenders, all those are going to be paid for by the state. That's a lot of expense. And sorry, there's some video playing there. I'll try to get away from that. And so just the cost factor alone is a massive tasking. And then you have the appeal aspects of it as well. So this deal is going to be cut where there is no appeal available as an option for Kolberger. So this is going to stop it. This is going to slam the door shut. There's going to be no more litigation. And so for him accepting responsibility for the four, and he's going to face life. I assume that's life without parole. They haven't talked about that, but I assume it's life without parole. And even if he was eligible for parole for killing four people, I don't see him ever getting out. So he's never going to see the light of day. And so everybody thinks, well, it's such a slam dunk win. He's going to be found guilty. Well, it could be, but there's not. We don't know all the details of all the evidence. We know we found the K-bar, which is a Marine style knife that was used to kill these college students. They found the sheath to the knife in one of the bedrooms where the murder victims were, and so this is something that directly tied them to it. But they could have maybe tried to say this was planted and somebody else was trying to set them up and all that kind of stuff. I don't think any of that would have flown with the jury, but you never know if you get some kind of outlier jury member. But think about it. It's not so much, I think, whether the issue is whether he's going to be found guilty of murdering these four or not. I think the real issue is, would a jury actually have convicted him and then sentenced him to the death penalty? So most states, if you look at it, it's you have a lot of folks that just are very much against the death penalty. And so if you have to go through all this and you're not guaranteed a trial that won't have some kind of legal glitch that winds up getting it reversed on appeal, and then you have a jury that's may not going to, despite the fact there's four college students murdered, they may not decide to give him the death penalty. There could be issues like maybe mental health that's a factor of mitigation for him. So maybe he has something like Asperger's that makes him not fit in, and this is something that is a mental defect, and he couldn't understand right from wrong fully. So I think for him to do a straight up plea, it takes away so much pain and agony for all that the folks there in the community and also the victims. And so I think that there is it's smart for the prosecution to do this. I mean, think about cases where they go full bore and they want first degree murder conviction or bust, and they wind up getting a bust. So let's look at some of you might be familiar with this case here. Hold on, let's first go through this here. The letter specifies that Kohberger will likely be sentenced to life in prison if he pleads guilty as expected. It's required for him to waive his right to appeal. We cannot fail in the toll. This case is taken on your family. Read the letter signed by Moscow Prosecuting Attorney Bill Thompson. This resolution is our sincere attempt to seek justice for your family. This agreement ensures that the defendant will be convicted, will spend the rest of his life in prison, and will not be able to put you and other families through the uncertainties of decades of post-convictions appeals. So if they think that, waiting these couple years has been bad, wait till appeal process kicks in, assuming there's a conviction. So it says Kohberger, previously a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, was charged with killing the four students in January of 2023. And they were stabbed in the early morning hours between 4:30-ish range. There's a wide-ranging gag order on the parties for this case. I remember following this very closely when they were looking for the suspect, and it sort of didn't follow it as much once they found him. And yeah, Kohberger appeared to have little connection to the victim, so that's something they could raise. Hey, what interaction did he have with him? How did he know him? Would he have picked this house? Apparently, he didn't have an alibi they could give notice of, or at least the judge shut it down. So he really had nothing to really help prove that he didn't do it. Remember, he was arrested a month after the killings in Pennsylvania. That's where he's from. After forensic DNA testing from the trash outside the Kolberger family home gave Idaho law enforcement the probable cause to arrest him. He drove all the way across the country while he's on college break. Yeah, and then prosecutors had submitted a variety of evidence that they say ties Kolberger to the crimes, including DNA found on a knife sheath on a bed close to Mogan. The single source profile was determined to be male and matched Kohberger through investigative genetic genealogy. The process of taking unknown DNA to public databases and finding relatives that share the profile. And then through process elimination, they figured out it was him. They said he's out driving alone during the night of the killings. I'm sure they have cell phone data showing where he was moving around. And he also came back later on that next morning, like around 10 o'clock, before the actual murders were reported to authorities. Remember, there was one survivor, Dylan Morton, says that she woke overnight by strange noises in their off-campus house. She told investigators she saw a masked man with bushy eyebrows in the home. When the roommates didn't respond to their text messages in the morning, Mortensen, the other survivor, Bethany Funke, called 911 around noon. So they didn't call him till noon. Heavy breathing and crying can be heard in the audio of the 911 call as their surviving roommates pass the phone between them and what sounds like two other people, answering the dispatcher in fragmented responses. Something has happened in our house. We don't know what. They reported that the 20-year-old female Kernodle was unconscious. She's not waking up. So anyway, I won't go into some of those gory details, but it was definitely a gory murder. And so the thing is, what could go wrong, right? It looks like he's nailed dead to right. What could go wrong on this case? Well, let's cover. I wanted to show you a couple cases here that you would think would easily get the death penalty or get a conviction. Many of you might be familiar with this case here. Look at this one here. The Parkland shooting in Florida. This guy was spared the death penalty. He killed 17 people, and they had 3 people on the jury that said, no, we want to spare his life. So imagine the tragedy of the family not understanding that. I wouldn't understand that. Man, can you imagine how upset they are? This thing goes to trial. He's found guilty. The jury finds him guilty, but then they decide to spare him his life after killing 17 people. Yeah, he shot people in the school, inside the school while the class is going on. So here it says 3 of the 12 jurors voted to spare the gunman following the sentencing trial. Under Florida law, a unanimous decision is needed in order for someone to be put to death. I think every state that does have the death penalty has that same requirement. It has to be unanimous. And if a single juror disagrees, then defendant is sentenced life in prison without possibility of parole. So the jury foreman told CBS News he did not vote for the life sentence, is not happy with how the sentencing worked out. They really came down to a specific juror who believed that the gun was mentally ill. She didn't believe that because he's mentally ill, she should get penalty. You could have the exact same thing kind of deal happen here with Kolberger. So there's one jury that was absolute no, and then 2 others sided got swayed by that holdout. So the jury found that there was aggravating circumstances as well. So in Florida, there's 16 aggravating factors justify imposing a death penalty. It had to be cold and premeditated. That's what we have here. They also had a 3-month sentencing trial. So they had a 3-month sentencing trial and still couldn't even get a death penalty on a guy that murdered 17 people. So when you compare that to Kolberger, he killed 4, just as cold-blooded and stuff, but all it takes is one juror, and you spend all that time, and then he has to go through appeal process and all that. And then I remembered a case a double murder case that happened in Iraq. There was a Staff Sergeant Martinez. He was found not guilty of killing 2 officers. So his name was Staff Sergeant Alberto Martinez. He was part of the 42nd Infantry Division of the New York National Guard. And this is why he was in Iraq. He took a Claymore mine and a grenade at Forward Operating Base Danger. That was in northern Iraq. And he lobbed him in a tent. And so you had a captain there, Phil Esposito, and a Lieutenant Luis Allen at the headquarters company for the whole division. And the headquarters company is where you have all the senior officers, all the colonels, the generals that are part of the 42nd Infantry Division. They would be part of that headquarters company attached to them anyway. So it says here during closing arguments of the case, this was back in 2008, that it happened at Fort Bragg, which is home of a lot of the rapid response forces for the military. They have a lot of different units there, both Army and Air Force units can respond around the world on short notice. But they had the trial there, even though the murder happened in Iraq. And what this article doesn't say, well, let's just go into the rest of this. During closing arguments in the case, the defense lawyer, Major John Gregory, told the jury that the government had no forensic evidence that proved Martinez was guilty without a reasonable doubt. In this case here, we got with Kolberger, they could maybe say somebody planted on it at the scene there and try to frame him, kind of thing. But the judge likely shut that down, so they didn't have as good of a defense. Here in this case, they argued that there was really never an investigation, and it was an embarrassment to the criminal investigation unit. And this is in Iraq, in a combat zone, and so they really didn't put the resources there that they could have. And they said that the crime scene was compromised, and the investigators had a preconceived notion of the defendant's guilt. The defense lawyer told the jury while Martinez had made inappropriate comments, had often cursed and got upset, often those were not proof he had committed the crime. It was truly a circumstantial case where there was no evidence to convict, and so they entered a not guilty verdict. And so there you go. So this guy, what you don't understand about this case is that something I knew through JAG channels is that this guy, through his defense lawyer, offered to plead guilty to murder of these 2 officers, and he just wanted to do life. He agreed to do life, and I can't remember if he would be with or without parole. But the top lawyer that advised the general on this said, no, let's take it to trial. Let's go for the death penalty. So this guy was offering to do a life sentence, just like Kohberger, and the government rejected it. They go to trial, and they lost. They lost the case completely. He walked out of the courtroom after being in pretrial confinement that whole time building up to the trial. And after the trial, he's found not guilty. So talk about, just assuming you're going to get a conviction. So here, the government had it in the bag. They had life without parole, or at least life. And now they had nothing, and the guy walks out of the courtroom an innocent person. So that's why you can overshoot and be overconfident on a case. You can even have factually guilty parties, but then you start doing things wrong. There's technicalities that you can have tank your case. So that's why you got inexperienced murder prosecutors and defense counsel. There's a lot of stuff that could go wrong, and so I think that this is ultimately the best outcome. That just takes a lot of worry and fear away from the victims. So when you also look at it from the standpoint that he's going to have to admit it in court, I assume in Idaho, excuse me, they're going to have to go into some kind of details of how is he admitting guilt to this. He's going to have to explain something of some degree of details of why he chose it and why he went in there and explained just very briefly. It won't be a whole lot of detail, but there'll have to be some indicators of guilt so that he's just not pleading guilty and doesn't accept any responsibility for it. So root beer float, you're thinking for the surviving roommates not needing to testify as emotional relief for them. Yeah. I saw somebody here in the beginning was hoping that the judge would not accept the plea deal, but I think the judge realizes this is a fair deal. There's no reason to deny it because nowadays it's a big roll of the dice whether you're going to get a murder conviction that results in the death penalty being carried out and followed through. Oh, here it is. Wayfair. The judge Hitler refused to accept a plea deal and go ahead with the trial. That would be a bad thing for the judge to do. If the judge thinks he needs deserving of the death penalty, then that's an iffy proposition. It's not a guarantee, even if you get a conviction. George Girl, you're saying the prosecution had only 2 years experience behind them. I wonder if that was a reason. Well, it should be a reason if that was the case. So people can move on with their lives. They can accept the fact that this guy is never going to be able to kill somebody again outside of prison. Jan Emmerich, the father of Kaylee, is absolutely furious. They want a jury of peers to convict him. I'm sure they do, but I think the more they sit back, the more this sits on them, and I think that they'll realize that this is actually the best outcome under the circumstances. Yeah, that's another thing. These families don't live close. The victim's family, they'd all have to travel and stay in hotels during the trial. So what they're going to spend 3 months in Boise. I mean, the toll it takes on them. I mean, look at the toll it took on for those of you that are following the Karen Reed case. They lived locally there, but her parents, they had to drive 40 miles each way to get to the court, and they had to go through 2 trials. There could be some technical glitch, and they have to retry the whole thing all over again. So yeah, Miriam Sandbrand, you're talking about the same one I just covered. Or is this a different MSD? I'm not sure what that is. Parkland, I think it was a Parkland one I was talking about. But yeah, there's a lot of these schools shooting kids that are accused of shooting up schools, and a lot of them have mental issues, and a lot of them are pretty much all of them are on psych meds. But see, yeah, I was surprised they destroyed that house so fast. That looked very, very unusual to me. You know, I mean, you think the jury would want to have a chance to maybe have a walkthrough and see what the layout of the house is? Miriam Sandbrand, you say life without parole is a worse sentence than death, maximum prison for him. No. I mean, I think the death penalty is right when you for the right case, and I think he's deserving of it. But under the circumstances, when there's no guarantee, and the defendant is willing to accept full responsibility and never see the light of day outside of prison. That's that's something I just think is striking the right balance of all the interests of the parties. Leslie, you're saying getting life without a chance to appeal is huge. Not everyone has a giant amount of money to throw at their case like Canton did. The case was multi-agencies in a bunch of different states. Lisa, you thought he was innocent. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, Jam, I think the family should have been consulted. So apparently they got a letter, but I think that's something that they would have interaction with victim witness coordinators, that they would maybe have some conversation with that. So I don't know why they would just send a letter. That seems a little bit impersonal and cold. And I would think they'd bring them into the office, each of the families, and sit down and talk to them, or talk to them as a group and say, hey, here's what's going on. We're going to offer this. And, families should be consulted and their inputs given, but ultimately they have to do what's right for justice in the prosecutor's eyes. Crypto, Catherine, wouldn't the jurors have to firmly, when asked about the death penalty, though? Yeah, they have to say that they're open to that idea, but when it comes down to it, a lot of people say, I don't want to be the one to sign off on somebody's death. Leah Simpson, you're saying innocent people take pleas, but this guy's obviously guilty of sin. He wasn't getting away from that knife sheath. So yeah, I agree that knife sheath DNA. This is too hard to explain away as somebody planted it there. Oh, see, Stavridis. I'm sure I'm saying your name wrong. Sorry about that. But you also thought he was innocent, so that's interesting. Okay, what if some of you guys would have gotten the jury and still thought he's innocent after hearing the government's case? So yeah, there's not a guarantee if you go to trial. Miriam, you're saying that jury would have felt sympathy for him because of his autism. I don't know that he's autistic, but could he have a lower level of it, like Asperger's? Lisa H. You also agreed you thought he was innocent. Wow, that's interesting. Okay. JM, you think the defense had a chance to obfuscate the facts and data with reasonable doubt? I mean, that's possible. They could throw, all they got to do is have one juror not be sure, have a reasonable doubt, and they get a hung jury. Yeah, I mean, the roommates and how that all went down, they didn't call the 911 till noon, that whole thing. There's a lot of bizarre facts about the case, so none of those are going to be addressed in front of a jury now if this plea deal goes through. Yeah, Tina S., you live in Idaho, and people are upset he took a plea. Yeah, a lot of people say, "Hey, you need to burn. You need to be executed." Okay, this is a extremely heinous killer that needs to have his life taken away because was mercilessly killing 4 college students that didn't even know the guy. So sure, he's deserving of it. That's not the issue. I never said he was not deserving of it. All I'm saying is when you consider all the things that can go wrong, all the burdens, financial, emotional, etc., it's actually something that we don't have to worry about him getting off on a technicality or having to go through multiple trials because some technical glitch gets it reversed on appeal. Oh, Bubsy, you're talking about that Darlie Routier. She's been on death row for crimes occurring in 1996 in Texas. She's been on death row. You're okay with no death penalty for Kohberger? Yeah, some of these things can just take forever. We have like 3 or 4 folks on death row in the military that's been around since the 80s, and no president has ever signed off on pursuing the death penalty on these. They're just sitting there languishing on death row. No president since the 80s, and there've been several since then. There was a guy that shot up a an indoor facility at Fort Hood, Texas. What was that, about 10 years ago? And he got the death penalty, but he hasn't been executed yet. He was a major, and he's never been executed, and he probably won't. For some reason, presidents aren't executing folks in the military. GV, I hope the plea is conditioned on him telling what happened. He'll have to give some minimum amount of detail, I imagine. I don't think people allow in any state allow somebody to go in there and on a case where you're facing a death penalty, you're willing to cut a deal for murder, where they just go in there and say, "I plead guilty," and they don't have to say anything about how they're pleading guilty. That'd be sort of suspect. Yeah, I mean, it would have been an interesting case to cover for 3 months. I thought we'd be covering this case. I was going to cover this one along with Don Adelson. So, I mean, I I think it's good a defendant pleads guilty, and if they're willing to offer him a deal where he's never going to be free. Think about it. In many states, he wouldn't even have that as an option, death penalty. In that case, he would be going to trial. So let me see here a second. I've not looked that up. They execute people quite a bit here in Texas. Okay, just the death penalty is legal in 27 states. So we got 50 states, 27 of them have the death penalty. Of the 27, 2, Oregon and Wyoming currently do not have any inmates sentenced to death. And they have it at the federal level and as well as military level, as well as American Samoa. So if you had 23 other states that don't have death penalty, so 23 other states where this crime would have occurred, he probably wouldn't be pleading guilty. He would just be contesting it all the way. The state with the highest per capita execution rate is Oklahoma. Texas has the highest number of executions, but they have a greater population, so per capita it's not the same. Right now, there's 2,100 people, men and women, on death row in the United States. So anyway, that's something to keep in mind, the perspective of that as well. Yeah. So those of you that think he's innocent, what's your reason for that? Yeah, Cheryl Crawford, the family will be able to give an impact statement. Little misread. You agree based on the trials you see. Nothing surprised you, and you agree. Jam, you're saying if you have irrational decision making by jurors, jury nullification, and circumstantial evidence, if the defense gets the DNA thrown out for technical reasons, the game changes. Jam, and you're saying the families need to understand if they go to trial and he's found innocent, it's over. I mean, think about it. In the Barry Morphew case, he was initially charged and they dismissed the charge. Did you know that prosecutor of that case was disbarred as a lawyer? She messed up the case so bad, this state bar actually had her yanked her license from her to practice law. So what if this prosecutor messes stuff up? I don't think he has anything like in that case, but not turning over exculpatory evidence on in a timely manner and things of that nature. There's okay, Maya Rodriguez Sorensen, Esquire, Majorie Stoneman Douglas is the same as Parkland. Okay. Okay, they're the same. All right, I didn't know that. It's like, what are the odds both of them had 17? I mean, can the prosecutor look him in the eye and say, I guarantee you I'm getting conviction and it's going to survive on appeal and he is going to get the death penalty? He can't guarantee that at all. So you got it in the bag with life, a life sentence times 4. So he's not going to get on parole even if he was eligible for that. right, Tina B, you're saying the change of plea hearing is supposed to be Wednesday, and that's when it will be official if Hitler signs it. Anastasia Beverhausen, you're saying Ethan's parents were not going to go to the trial. They talked about how the outcome didn't matter to them because it's not going to bring them back. To listen to the details of how their son was murdered is, I mean, it's just horrifying. Sir Tedrick Walker, you thought he was framed. That's interesting. Okay. Gina B, you just want to see all the evidence at trial. I appreciate that. It's glad to know not everybody thinks because somebody's charged they're automatically guilty. The state's got to prove the case. Cammy Burchett, he wasn't able to have a defense. Judge blocked everything about multiple perpetrators. Yeah, I think that's wrong. You shouldn't have to prove to the court why you need to have their authorization to present a defense that somebody else committed the crime. That just seems very much an issue of constitutional magnitude, that you should be able to present a defense if you want to point the finger at somebody. You really don't have any evidence to say it, but that's what your client wants to say if you're defending them on a murder case. And what's it hurt to just let them have their day in court? The judge is going to be a gatekeeper on that. I just don't get that. JC the Music Man, the best can always be better. How about not allowing the state to lock up people and torture them until they falsely confess? Shantis Inferno, hi, all the Gonsalves family were contacted Friday. They said a hard no, taking the death penalty away. Taking the death penalty away. Their youngest daughter also put out a statement. I get it. Why they can be upset. I just think in the down the road, I think they'll be able to accept this outcome better if it goes through, assuming it goes through and the judge accepts it. Teresa Dirksmeyer, he thought he could pull off a perfect crime. Yeah, I think he did. Think that. Georgia boat girl, there's too many things that lined up and the dots connected easily. He was guilty. Larissa Harris, she said Hitler was on a mission to make sure there's a guilty verdict. He was definitely on the prosecution's team. Easy to see in his rulings. This was not going to be a fair trial. Yeah, another reason to have a serious conversation about pleading guilty. Think about it also, because I've been saying this for numerous times on this channel, that you're not going to have many guilty pleas with wealthy defendants. If you look at the Adelson murder cases out of Florida, they're not going to cut a deal and plead guilty to anything because they got money. They got money to hire lawyers, expensive lawyers, and so they're going to fight it. And when you have a lot of money, lawyers are not as inclined to want to talk plea bargains with you because they won't make as much money. So there was not a lot of money here. You don't have Kohberger having millions of dollars to hire expensive lawyers, and they want to earn their money. And make a name for themselves. So public defenders is trying to do their job. They're not looking for the limelight. They're not making the big bucks. So I think you have a much more sterile environment to have personal agendas not to get in the way of justice. Dan's DeStefano, CPA, I'm not sure how I feel about the death penalty, and you're right about it. Sure, he can't always vote for the death penalty. I'm sure he'll suffer in prison for the rest of his life in agony. Yeah, I mean, he's not going to have it easy. It's going to be very rough. If you're a quadruple murderer, convicted murderer, and he doesn't seem to interact well with people, he doesn't fit in well with folks, so he's probably going to be in solitary confinement a lot because people will be picking on him. I didn't know about the dog being in the house. That's poor dog, Sir Tedrick Walker. Islander Bird, his car computer was traced to visiting the house several times. He went to the restaurant the girls worked. He was on their social media pages tracking one of the girls. Yes, there's more information there than just a sheath. He also ordered the sheath like a month before on Amazon, I think it was. So I think it'd be hard to say that that was planted on him or planted to make it look like he was a perpetrator when he wasn't. See Stavratis. Does the cell phone data clinch the case, or does the trash he threw away at his dad's house? I think they got it clinched just with the sheath alone. I mean, that resolves so many issues. The fact that they know he bought a K-bar knife a month before. Thanks, never forget. You're saying Tom Creech was a failed death penalty case in Idaho? Yeah, 3-month trial, a very long time, especially with graphic details. So think about it. You got to have, for a 3-month trial, you got to have probably 24 total, 12 and 12 alternates. Okay, Merritt, you're saying life in a 5 by 9 cell, 23 hours a day. You're astounded people feel like he's almost getting away with this crime. Severitis, you're asking about my military cases to draw upon. Tell us more about AWOL soldiers. I've had some AWOL and desertion cases, but those aren't really anything to talk about. There's some sympathetic stories for different ones, but it's not much to really talk about, I would say. Yeah, Georgia boat girl, the trash, the gloves, the DNA, the knife sheath, the knife purchase, the baklava, that head covering, the car matching, him admitting he was out wandering around at that time and cutting off his cell phone. Yeah, I remember about that because he lived over across state lines there. Went to Washington State University. It's about, what was it, 30 miles away or something like that? It's been a while since I was looking at those facts. But him being around that house at the time the crime happened is a lot of indicators that they got the right guy. So, Jedrick Walker, you're looking forward to Donna Adelson's trial and Wendy's arrest. Yep, both those should happen this year, right? Larissa Harris, you're saying case wasn't so cut and dry and Hitler wasn't dropping death penalty. He was tough on defense. You think he disrespected the defense and interrupted the most hearings? This trial wouldn't be fair. That could have been a factor. JC Music Man, the government should never be allowed to kill people. The government really gets things right. Georgia Boat Girl, will we be able to hear all the evidence they have against him after the plea? I think a lot of the evidence won't come to light, like there would be if there was a trial, contested trial. Jam, and you're saying they destroyed one of the biggest pieces of evidence anyway, the house. Yeah, I just don't get that. I think they just wanted to obliterate any memory of that horrible scene there. But for the sake of a trial and justice, I don't know why they would have done that. Sir Terry Walker, you think the knife was a plant? Too many shady stuff going on. Well, it's another reason that getting a guilty plea is a good thing for the prosecution and the victims. They may not have gotten a conviction. Maybe they would have gotten a hung jury. Jim, yeah, the Morphew case, I'm going to look at that some more, and then I may do that this week, even cover it, I don't know, Friday or Sunday night. Stavridis, can a disbarred lawyer practice in another state? No, because once you get suspended on one, that's a trickle down effect. Just they all notify each other, and then if you're disbarred in one, that they have reciprocity in the other states as well. So if you get disbarred in one, you're going to be done for in all the others as well. You could, under certain conditions or after years have gone by, you can apply for reinstatement. So that does happen, but it's not a guarantee that you'll be reinstated. CJC Music Man, you're saying no way Kolberger could kill 4 people by himself in 7 minutes, and none of each of the victims' blood is on each other, meaning separate murder weapons. So there you go. Somebody like you could be on the jury and be adamant that they got the wrong guy. And look, we had Suffocate overturned years later as well. Look at those Menendez brothers in California. They were on death row, and then they got that reverted to life. What's going on with that other guy, the Scott Peterson case? They're talking about there was exculpatory evidence that wasn't shared with the defense. Did he get a? Let me look that up. Did he get a? I think that was denied, though, if I remember right. Lacey Peterson was his wife. She was pregnant at the time. LA Innocent Project files a 400-page petition seeking a new trial, claiming it was railroaded with circumstantial evidence. On a LA station, they're saying new evidence suggests Scott Peterson may be innocent, as it points to burglars as the possible killers of his wife and unborn son. So anyway, apparently, yeah, he's currently serving a life sentence without possibility of parole for the murder of his wife, Lacey Peterson, and their unborn son, Connor. Oh yeah, so his death sentence was overturned in 2020, and he was resentenced to life in prison the following year. In 2024, there was a status hearing related to a request by the LA Innocence Project, a legal advocacy organization who claimed to have new evidence supporting Peterson's innocence. However, this hearing did not result in Peterson's release, and his sentence remains unchanged. Okay. So anyway, there's so many things that can unravel many years down the road on death penalty cases. So if you got it in the bag with him never getting out, hey, there's CU Buffs RN. Yeah, well, I'm looking at that Morphew case, so that's up near you there. Well, I guess I don't know if you're up there in Boulder, but that's where the Colorado University is at. I haven't heard back from my cousin yet either. I gotta find out because she knows something about the case. She knows some of the parties. Hey, there's a trial channel. Glad you were able to catch us here. You have conflicted feelings on this. Huge shock. Yeah, it was a shocker, wasn't it? I'm sure you'd have been doing a lot of coverage of it as well. I've just been talking about tonight about how it's generally can be disappointing on one hand, but overall, if you look at the big picture of justice, it really takes a lot of unknowns off the table, and having that peace of mind, knowing he's going to be put away for life, is ultimately the most important goal that you have for somebody that's a heinous murderer like him. Yeah, I don't think he would have walked, but I mean, he could easily had a hung jury. All those things are off the table if he pleads guilty and the judge accepts his plea. SSS, you're saying there's a hearing on the dock for Wednesday. I've not checked. See if they've updated that. But you're the second one that said that, so Nick Smith, luckily his DNA was on the sheath. Otherwise, he may have had a chance with the jury. Well, even with that, he can always have a chance. And everyone wanted this guy to go to court and get the death penalty, but there was no guarantee it would be convicted. This way, he spends his life without parole. I think it's good for everyone. Teresa Dirksmeyer, you're saying he bought another exact knife to replace a missing one? That's interesting. I'd not heard that before. Yeah, and if he's in general population, the inmates may mete out their own justice. Yeah, there's a chance he could wind up executed in prison by the inmates. Isn't that what happened to Jeffrey Dahmer? He was a serial killer up in Wisconsin, I think it was. And he was involved in gruesome things like cannibalism and also trying to preserve body parts. Yeah, he was born in 1960. He was killed in 1994. He had different massive disorders of the brain. He was convicted at trial in Wisconsin, convicted of 15 to 16 homicides, and he was, let's see, convicted in 92, and he was beaten to death in 1994 in Portage, Wisconsin. So, yeah, prison is not a safe place. And I think because he doesn't seem to be interacting well on a social level, so I can see him having to go in solitary just to avoid all the threats. Jason, Music Man, you've been in the reserves, Army Reserve for 31 years, so thanks for your service. You're familiar with UCMJ cases, can be awful, but kind of boring, I guess. Yeah, the reserves doesn't have any court martials unless you're on active duty, so those are jury trials. Yes, we call them, instead of juries, we call them panels, but they are consisting of multiple members of units that come together. They're handpicked by the convening authority, and then they make up the jury. So, well, there's jury selection process just like there is in civilian courts, criminal courts, and all the rules of evidence are for the most part the same as in any civilian court or federal court. Altered, you're saying there's been many channels that have been saying for 2 years that Kohberger's innocent. He would not take life if he's innocent. Trial channel, what goes all into a plea hearing like this? Will it be just a quick in and out kind of thing? I think it all depends on what they have for the amount of what is a providence inquiry to see how much detail they go into for him to admit that he actually committed the crimes he's pleading guilty to. He's gonna have to explain it to some, at least a minimum level of why he's guilty for the judge to accept the plea, I imagine. Little Haroke, you're asking if I've read and watched Hitler's being a judge. Do I have feelings on bias? I strongly feel this choice is the only one to be made. He would not get a fair trial with that judge. That's what I'm hearing. I've not seen enough to form my own conclusions on it, but that could have been a factor as well for them to have a serious discussion on Kolberger pleading guilty. Chill pill, you're saying you know somebody in Spokane, which is a city in Washington State which borders Idaho, has done a deep dive on this one. So much info. She's made a file. Even drove to King Road to see the house. She totally thought he was innocent. Now she's confused. Cammy Burchett, you're saying he was diagnosed with autism. I don't know where folks getting that. How did that make it out in the public? I think it's true. I just don't recall where I heard that from or where we're getting that. JC, you're saying your ex-wife went to high school with Lacey Peterson. Well, do you know who went to high school with Scott Peterson? The a famous golfer. What's that guy's name? And I think they're on the golf team together. Oh, he's an American golfer. I think he's got like his last name is like Phil Mickelson. That's who it is. They went to University of San Diego High School. So anyway, just a trivia point there. Amy Bonner, you're saying you always lean towards guilty with Scott Peterson, but there's a few things that do make me wonder. Yeah, there's something about I saw the deal about some van with some that somebody saw around the time that she disappeared that was in that neighborhood, parked near the house, and those guys were convicted burglars. And I think there's also some history of violence with them. And so why would that van be there at the time this happened? But the thing that really makes it look bad for Scott Peterson is that he was happened to be boating long distance away at the same lake they found her remains. That to me was like the thing that you cannot undo. Nacho Mama, you're saying no one, trust me, no one takes a small fishing boat out in the middle of winter. Amy Bonner, you're saying he bought a new knife sheath on Amazon afterwards. That's another indicating fact of guilt. Definitely a strong indicator. Okay, Vicky, you're saying he didn't buy it. He actually just put it in the cart to order it. That still is an indicator, suspicious indicator. Harry, Interstellar Harry, unless he has the money in prison to pay off the other murders, he's a walking dead man. Just me, you're saying Leslie Van Houten is out because the death penalty got overturned. Yeah, Kohberger can change his mind until he actually does the plea in front of the judge. The judge accepts that he could always back out. Thanks, Food is Love, for being a mod again tonight. Yeah, it was Christmas Day. You're talking about Scott Peterson. Don't know about Phil Mickelson still playing. I haven't seen his name around lately like he used to. That's Mama MSN. The Barry Morphew case, I was looking at maybe covering that, do initial coverage on that this weekend, sometime Friday or Saturday, perhaps. Okay, Liz Pond Grants, you're saying the attorneys asked for the death penalty to be set aside, citing Kolberger's diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. Okay. I do think I remember hearing about that now. Bindlestick, yeah. Remember how he used the alias Papa Roger to chat about the murders? He seeks attention. Okay, JC, you're good. I'm okay. Well, military cases can be screwed up. There's a lot of cases that can be messed up because of poor investigators. There's a lot of poor investigations all across America that can affect the outcomes of cases. So many prosecution cases are lost because of poor investigations. The investigators are bad and the prosecutors aren't much better. So you combine those two things and you got a shot. So, all right, it's about 11, almost quarter of midnight here. So I'm going to go ahead and shut it off. But, so if you guys want to look at the Morphew case, Barry Morphew, his wife's name was Suzanne, and she sent him a text message talking about they need to end things and do it civilly, and she was dead a couple days later. So, yeah. So, Larissa Harris, you're saying you watched Yuri Buchanan testifying at a hearing today on the Brian Walsh case. Unbelievable how these investigators won any trials. I've not listened to any of that. Teresa Dirksen, you're saying he got busted lying gay on a pretrial. That's interesting. Anyway, all right. Well, that's it for tonight. You all have a great week, and maybe I'll see you this weekend.